Afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? You having a good time? Okay, so I'm really excited to talk to you all about claiming a seat at the table and ensuring that you're inviting and bringing others along. Who has heard the song that was just played? Okay, what's the song? Okay, so one thing you should know about me, I was a teacher. I'm very comfortable calling out into the audience. What's your name? Elizabeth said, so the Carters, boss. And what Jay-Z is saying is, over here we measure success by how many people are successful next to you. Here we say you're broke if everybody is broke except for you. And I think that that theme has rung true thus far today, and I'm excited to talk about that because even before the Carters album came out, it's something that was ingrained in me from a young age. That is something I deeply believe. My success is not just my success, it's my community's success. So I want to tell you a little bit about Strategic Community Partners, or SCP, before we get started. And it's going to tie into how I got a seat at the table and how I've also used that power and influence to ensure that others who look like me are sitting at the table next to me too. So SCP is a national organization. We are passionate and work to power forward missions rooted in education, equity, and justice. We are capacity builders. I was having a conversation yesterday during the happy hour, and someone said, "Oh, you're a consultant," and I cringed. I cringed because at SCP, we believe that you must pair strategy with community and cultural context. And when you blend those two things, beautiful things can happen. Consultants oftentimes are not doing that. Oftentimes, you see folks who are really strong at strategy or execution, and they're completely lacking in competence around cultural and community context. You also will see people who are down for the cause, but they might be struggling a little bit, not all the time, but when it comes to strategy and execution. We blend those two things together. We're working alongside governmental entities, the White House under Obama, school districts. Just had to put that out there. I appreciated the firebomb earlier, Heidi, on the screen. We're working with community-based organizations, nonprofits, and we're strategic planning with them. We're advising, we're project managing, we're designing and executing large-scale events that engage hundreds or even thousands of young people, and we're bringing together the village to make that happen. So before we dig in, I want to share with you a few statistics. Today, I'm about one of 12 speakers, I want to say. I believe from conversations, 2 of us identify as Black women. In fact, the other woman's name is also Chanel. That's about 16% representation, which if you look at the American population, pretty decent. We represent Black women, about 14.6% of the American population. If you dig in these statistics, though, what I want to do is call out the cultural anomaly that I'm standing here today, not the statistical anomaly. Statistically, there are a ton of Chanels beyond the 2 of us that have spoken today. Black women are doing our thing, but you don't often see us. We are not a statistical anomaly, we are a cultural anomaly, and that our presence is often not seen. If you look across communities of color, 1 in 4 Black women ages 25 to 35 have minimal a 4-year degree. We are more educated than other communities of color, generally speaking, and I say that also recognizing oppression, struggles, barriers. We also are more educated statistically than our male counterparts. Is anyone familiar with the Nielsen Company? Okay, so you all might be aware of the report that came out a few years ago. The Nielsen Company looked at Black demographics, and what they found was that between 2007 and 2012, Black woman-owned, majority-owned businesses grew by 67%. That was in oh, y'all can clap it up. Go ahead and clap it up. That was in comparison to 23% for all female-owned businesses and 13% for white woman-owned businesses. 67%. In 2015, they equated that to another 1.5 million Black woman majority-owned businesses. 1.5 million. This is a conference on entrepreneurship. How many of you are entrepreneurs? How many of you work in startups? How many times have you sat at a table and a Black woman not been there when a decision was being made? How many times have you been at a leadership table and black women have not been there? How many times have you been talking about a program, an initiative, anything where a decision is being made and you knew someone was missing from the table? Black women or beyond. I share these statistics to say we are not a statistical anomaly. We have to change who is at the table. Whether you already have a seat at the table or whether you are looking to get one, it is on all of us to ensure that everyone is at the table who should be, who is asking to be, and who deserves to be. So, wanted to put that out there. I also want to put out there, again, this is relevant whether you have that seat, you're looking to have that seat, and this is actually what SCP was birthed on. We were birthed on the notion that communities have the answers we need, that we have the solutions we seek, and that we are the leaders that we think we have been waiting for. We have, over the past 4 years, been able to work with everyone from President Obama through the Michigan Department of Education, through partners from Oakland, California, to New York, and most of our work is actually in Detroit. Because we've been able to get a seat at the table, we have been bringing others along, because there were people who brought me along. There were people who brought those became for me along. I'm actually gonna skip. So a few questions that we want to consider today. How can you connect the dots across your passion and the work that you're doing? What table should you be at? And how do you bring others in? I warned you, I was a teacher. I'm going to ask for some conversation to happen. I'm gonna call out some folks in the audience, get ready for it, okay? And if you look down, it's probably gonna make me call on you. Just saying, sometimes people think it works. So I want to, as we're going through this conversation, ensure that I'm not only sharing a little bit about my story and the story of those whose shoulders I stand on, but I also want to make sure you're walking away with some tangible steps that you can take, whether you're continuing to sit at that table or whether you're getting to that table. So my passions, in case you haven't realized, I am very passionate about Black people. I identify as a Black woman. We are beautiful, we are gorgeous, we are powerful people. More power to everybody, but this is my passion. I'm also passionate about education. I, as a kid, was that kid. Do we have any teachers in here or former teachers? Yes, okay. Clap it up for me, y'all, yes. So, I was that kid that would come up to you the last week of school and ask for more homework over the summer. Yes, do not judge me. I was a nerd. I was a bona fide nerd. I say that with love. More power to all the nerds out there. And I had an avid love of reading. I loved learning. It's no surprise that I became a middle school teacher. I was an English teacher. And I was able to instill that passion for reading in so many of my students. There's a quote that was on my desk as a teacher and is still with me to this day. And it's Frederick Douglass's quote. And it marries my two passions. Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. My grandparents had a 4th and 6th grade education. They were also two of the most brilliant, intelligent people I know to this day. But because they were Black, they were not afforded an education. They could not continue with their education, but they made sure that generations that came after them knew the importance of it. So, being passionate about my people and being passionate about education, you can imagine that this article, when it came out a few years ago, was pretty hard to swallow, affirming in some ways, shocking in others. So, had anyone seen this report that came out a few years ago? The average Black family's wealth, it would take 228 years to catch up to the average of a white family. And we would only catch up if literally the wealth of a white family stopped growing. Like halted, stopped, ceased. I would imagine everyone here is pretty intelligent. That's not going to ever happen. I won't see wealth equality in my lifetime. I won't see it in 2 generations. So I started thinking. And it was affirming, but it was really hard to swallow. There were several conversations that I had with friends and family and colleagues. Like, what do you do with this? Like, how many of us have seen a headline, race, gender, whatever it might be about, and it is like such a blow that you almost don't know what to do. Anyone ever feel helpless, not know where to go? What do you do about it? So that's how I felt. So I started connecting some dots. I wanted to figure out, what can I do? What can I do about this? I know that my life's work is dedicated to education and equity, but I've got to do something more because we have a large gap to close. So I knew from this article, I was like, all right, we need to build wealth. Point number one. I also was doing research, and I didn't know this from my own family because I was breaking cycles of generational poverty. But what I learned was that property was one of the most significant wealth generators across time. It's funny when you're a kid, who heard like, work hard and it'll pay off? Anyone hear that? Okay, if you actually look, what's kind of depressing is that the tangible 9-to-5 work or 60-hour-a-week work isn't what generates the most wealth across time. It's property, it's life insurance. Not to say stop working hard, that's not what I'm saying, okay? But when I started finding out these things, please believe, like, I have a ridiculous amount of life insurance, a ridiculous amount. What I didn't have was property. I bought a house when I was 23, sold my house in St. Louis. I didn't have any property when I read this article. So I keep thinking. I knew what I was passionate about. And I knew that I did this work through SCP. Something else was missing. So one day, randomly, talking to myself in my house, as I usually do, I decided that SCP was going to explore buying a building. A Black-owned business, a Black woman-owned business, Black-owned property in Detroit, where property is being bought up in droves by people who don't look like me and are not from there. So now that you know that I'm unapologetically Black and really passionate about it, I'm actually going to ask you to turn to your neighbor. So I'm going to put a pin in my story. And there are 5 questions that I want you to kind of think about. You might want to take a picture of the slide if it's helpful. But first, if you want a seat at the table, you need to start connecting the dots, okay? So what are you passionate about? What is an issue or opportunity that's related to that passion? What work do you do? This might be like your 9-to-5 work or 60-hour, 40-hour plus work. This could also just be a skill that you have that maybe people don't know about. And where do these two worlds meet? When you think about that, what does that make you think about doing or exploring? So I'm gonna leave this slide up, and I want you to turn to someone next to you. Okay, I see some people taking pictures of it, or me, hello. So I want you to turn. I'm going to find the timer, and I want you to take about 1.5 minutes and start parsing through some of these questions with someone that's next to you. Cool? All right. Oh, thank you. I was like, I can't see my water. So the mic isn't working still? Okay.
I'm happy to hold anything you want.
I'm going to give this back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah. So wait, are you responsible for the Madison building?
Our office is in the Madison building, but I'm great to share. We're purchasing a building.
Okay.
All right. Oh, I hate to be that person, but I'm so sorry. I have to cut the I know, I'm sorry. You're looking at me so seriously right now. All right, bring it back. If you hear me and your neighbor is talking, oh, I appreciate you. So, oh, bring it back, y'all. Bring it back. Hello. Hello. Just bring it back. I'll just keep saying bring it back. So as you were talking with someone, whether they were at your table, across from you, I'm curious what you all talked about. And I want to just call out, that this obviously takes much more than like a minute or two. Yes, so I'm saying, look, yeah, I saw you kept going, yes. So take a picture of the slide. But I'm curious if we can maybe have like one person or a couple people share out. What are you thinking about? And if you want to just literally pop up and like yell out, feel free to. I'm looking around the room. Anyone want to share? Yes.
So in the passionate section,
Yeah.
my first question, I think we have the mentality always of paying it forward,
Mhm.
but what can we do to prevent? So what stages can we take to prevent and
Okay.
not just have it happen and then pay it forward?
Yep. Okay, thank you. And Jasmine, I see your hand. You want to call out real quick?
Okay, so Casey and I, we're both into education, and I'm into equity and passionately black like you. And so what we're talking about as she is a former teacher is that the access, we know the opportunities exist, but the access to those opportunities are so limited. So we're talking about equity and equality. We have to start backwards and figure out how do we help the parents, help the children to figure out how they can work this thing. So that was
Jasmine, you know we live in the same city. You know I'm going to be checking in with you, right? Okay, all right. So I'm cognizant of time. But so first you want to start connecting these dots, okay? Then you're going to want to start to do some research around like what tables should you be at? And there are a few questions that I've asked and our team has been having conversations around to help us know what tables we should be at. I'm just going to put these up here. So again, what are you interested in exploring? Then once you have an idea around like, I might be interested in figuring something out around this, there are people who might already be doing this work. In fact, I guarantee you there are people who are already doing this work. Even if there's one person, that's one person you should talk to, one organization that you should talk to. Who are the experts? And there might actually be opportunities that exist to support you in this work, whether that's a professional learning community, whether that's a grant program, whether that's something like Build Institute. There are plenty of spaces that can support you. For us, what was interesting is that we didn't find too many Black-owned buildings where community organizations were operating out of them, particularly in Detroit. Is anyone familiar with Black family development? Okay, Alice Thompson, brilliant woman. Founder, I think they've been around for 40, Allison's gonna hurt me. Let's just say 40 years now. Amazing woman, they own their property, and they do exactly what their name says. They focus on the development of Black families. We also found a place in DC where we have another office, and in St. Louis. But what we also found more of was that there were a ton of phenomenal people doing this work that were struggling to acquire property for one reason or another. And so we viewed this as a unique opportunity to possibly help address a gap, particularly in Detroit's ecosystem. I also talked to a few experts. Anyone familiar with Build-A-Bear? It's connected, okay. So I'm like, it's connected, I promise. Maxine Clark is the founder of Build-A-Bear. She's also a dear friend of mine. She started mentoring me when I was a teacher in St. Louis, so I lived in St. Louis for about 10 years. And we became wonderful friends. When I go back, in fact, half the time I stay with her and her husband. And Maxine retired from Build-A-Bear about 5 years ago. Didn't really retire, made time for other work, which is essentially education and equity work. And they actually launched Del Mar Divine. It's opening in fall 2020, and it's a community space. It is not Black-owned, though. So what I do view is Maxine as an expert who is in the community real estate development world. She's bringing people together to the table. But we had to kind of pick and do research and figure out who to talk to and continue to do research and get recommendations. So again, I would encourage you, if you want to take a picture of this slide and a couple more slides, you might find there's something that exists already, and I can totally jump into this. You might also be kind of creating a lane. There's not a right or wrong, but what I do encourage you to do is make sure that you identify tables that exist. Don't go and reinvent the wheel. Don't go and start your own thing for the sake of saying you started it when there are people that might be doing that work. So how do you bring others to the table? I'm going to put these up here and quickly ask you to take a picture of this slide because my time is coming to an end. Whether you already have a seat at the table or whether you are looking to have a seat at the table, you need to ask yourself these questions. Who is your work serving? How many of you have launched a program for kids and a kid wasn't sitting at the table? How many of you have talked about education and you know you haven't talked to a teacher? How many of you have thought about parent engagement and you never talked to parents? Who is doing that work? Who isn't typically at the table? Who hasn't been invited to the table? And who are people recommending? So I might talk to, anyone in this audience after this, and you might have a recommendation for me to connect with someone. I'm going to, because there's power in community, there's power in connections. So in wrapping up, I want to share with you how we have been bringing people to the table. So in conversations, we found there wasn't really a lot of Black-owned spaces in Detroit. In 2 days, SCP will be closing on a building. Our building will have SCP offices, but most of our space will actually be for the community. Our name is Strategic Community Partners, and we stick by our word. We are an organization for and with communities. So we're working with organizations like Journey, like the College for Creative Studies. We are bringing in all Black and woman-owned companies to do work with us on our building. We're going to be hosting what we're calling, it'll have a cooler name, but essentially a teacher town, where teachers can come in, have free printing, free resources, conference space. Community members will be able to come in and host anything from Bible study to book clubs to just hanging out in the space and doing work. And what I'm going to say in wrapping up is that you are invited to this table. SCP stands on the shoulders of giants. I stand on the shoulders of giants. For 4 years, we have been working day in and day out to get a seat at the table. And we have a seat now. And I know that it's my duty and my responsibility to ensure that others are at that table with us. So I'm going to ask you, if you have a table, who is not there? Who should be there? We all have that thought in the back of our minds when you know that someone's missing from the conversation, when you know someone is being silenced or shut out. I'm encouraging you this week to reach out and invite that person to the table. And if you don't have a seat at the table, I want you to come find me. I want you to connect with someone today at this conference, and I want you to think about what tables you need to be at and how you can leverage others to get you to that table. I talked about what SCP does, and we're building a village. Well, we're actually literally building a village. And we're going to have a building that is part of that village soon. I consider you all part of that village now. If you're interested in learning more and hosting an event there and contributing in some way to our community space, please find me, because it truly takes a village. Thank you.